Hello, everybody, and welcome. So here we are. My name's Jacqui. We've met before if you've been listening to these podcasts, and we're here with Michael Bohuslav, who is sharing his wisdom on the Bhagavad Gita. In this particular session, we're up to the beginning of chapter 2. So we will just hit the ground running, and straight over to you, Michael, to take us through the beginnings of chapter 2, Bhagavad Gita.
Thank you, Jacqui, and a warm welcome to our listeners. Last week we finished chapter 1, as Jacqui just alluded to, and but before we start today on chapter 2, I'd just like to make a few short comments in regards to the huge difference between these two chapters. Firstly, in chapter 1, we focused entirely on the battle, the war, the whole scene of the teaching, if you like. And I just want to quickly refer to a few snippets in Jack Hawley's Gita that you mentioned to people before, Jacqui. It's a lovely book and very easy to read. But I just want to thank you. I just want to read a couple of snippets from his comments in this regard, in the reference to the killing aspect, because sometimes it can cause a lot of confusion in people that are very early to this sort of teaching. There's a thinking of you've got to stab your cousins or kill them or this or that. So I want to just make it very clear that that's what applied on the battlefield, and in a war, of course, they're the things that happen. But so that's the physical part, as I say, of that teaching. But the more important part, Jacqui and the listeners, is it's a subtle aspect that we're talking about killing off. And even the word killing is sort of a misnomer, in the sense that what we're really talking about, and a lot of the listeners I think would know, be familiar with many of these words, is renunciation, or non-attachment, or letting go. So it's that aspect. So rather than just dart around at the moment, I'll read you. I'll read the listeners some little aspects of what actually the reference, what's happening on the battlefield, and then give a little take on how that translates into the battle within and what's happening with us as human beings. So I'm just going to pick out little lines here and there. So at the very start, he says, "I can hardly hold my bow. My skin burns all over. My mind whirls. I can barely stand up. What is happening to me?" And this is a description of when we find ourselves in what we might call a tight situation, where we're in a heated argument, or we've received some bad news. All our body reacts, doesn't it? The mind's whirling around, the emotions, we can break out in a sweat, tense up, all sorts of things. So this is the relevance to us as human beings. So Arjuna takes a deep breath and speaks. He says, "Oh, I see bad omens for our side, Krishna. I can't see any good coming from slaying my relatives." See the reference, slaying my relatives? Well, don't worry, you're never going to be slaying your relatives in that sense, but you might be slaying them in another sense. He says, "Now I don't desire victory or kingdom or pleasure. Of what use are they? What use is life, Krishna?" This is that hopeless feeling we sometimes experience in life. But we're being urged in the teachings that don't give up hope, and you must fight. Work your way through whatever it is that's causing a problem or some turmoil in our lives. He says, "It's also useless, Krishna, even though these enemies want to kill me. I don't want to kill them, not even for the kingship of the whole world or even the heavens." He says, "I would forever be ashamed, Krishna, if I were to kill my kith and kin. So what if they're evil? They're my relatives. How could I ever be happy?" And he's talking about his cousins who have actually tried to assassinate him and his entire family. Now, again, we're not talking that sense, but we have lots of family disputes, don't we, Jacqui? Where people argue, and very strongly, and they don't talk to each other, and they hate each other, and all sorts of things. So this is the sort of battle that we're more interested in, rather than the other battle. And this is why I'm sort of stressing it, because we're switching over from chapter 1, which focused sort of all of that, into chapter 2, when the rest of the Gita, the remaining 16 chapters, which will be constantly just now focusing on the individual human being and helping get some new knowledge to tackle any of the issues that we face in life, either at the moment or in coming years of our life. All right. So he says social turmoil is hell, Krishna, for the whole family, destroys the family and for the whole of society. Well, when I look around the world, Jacqui, don't know about you, but I see a lot of turmoil in the world. Even actual wars where they are killing and there's blood and all the rest of it. But also mainly in my line of work with teaching, I come in constant contact with the students who are experiencing and sharing the battles that they're going through, whether they're physical ailments or whether they're family disputes or financial disputes or problems or whatever. So they're constantly reoccurring in people's lives. Often, it's not all doom and gloom, of course. Sometimes there's some great joy and peace for some people due to their good karma. They have what we might call a fairly charmed life. But for most of us, there's some ups and downs, some argy-bargy, some good times, some not so good times. And all the teachings are going to help people, or can help if they choose to listen to it and put it into practice, to make fundamental changes, and mainly in the mind, how you think and how you see everything and all the rest of it. But that'll all unfold over the next 40 weeks. So just to finish off, I've made a few notes on the bottom of the book while I was reading it, just to remind me. So all of these references that I've just alluded to, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the subtle killing off, and I mentioned that in the 2 podcasts in chapter 1, didn't I, Jacqui? And I just mentioned to you at the start that the words that we might be more familiar with is non-attachment or letting go. And the non-attachment or letting go or renunciation or sacrificing is all of our beliefs and desires and likes and expectations, these sorts of things. That's what entangles us in worldly turmoil. And we need to, the teaching will emphasize being calm, controlling the senses, and eventually being the controller of the mind. So when, you hear people sometimes think, oh yeah, I'm the master of my own destiny. And most people would like to be the master of their own destiny. It's a nice thought. The reality is that most people aren't the master of their destiny at all. Ego's their master, and they're at the pull and whim of your egoic thoughts and emotions. So this is what we're going to be focusing on over many weeks to change that around. And as it says in the Gita, we want the rightful ruler of our kingdom. So we've got a higher self, which I call the Buddhi, and that's the part that we're going to focus on and strengthen and become more familiar with and start using more and more constantly once we become aware of it. And in doing that, the egoic side, the non-truthful side of our mind and emotions will start to decrease. You can't have them both at the same level. So as one increases, the other one automatically decreases. Okay? And
Perfect.
so just to finish, Jacqui, the reason we find it difficult to let go of the attachments of all of these enemies of ours, our desires and expectations and likes and dislikes, as I mentioned, is because they've been such a big part of all of our life so far, but in a bigger picture, all our previous lives as well, they're very ingrained, they're very habitual. And so it's going to require a fair amount of effort and a lot of courage and a lot of perseverance to overcome them. And the irony of it all, Jacqui, the last little point on this is that even when we come to realise that these old tendencies are actually hurting us, harmful, we still, for some crazy reason, we're so attached to them, we still don't want to let them go. So as crazy it all seems, but it's not a hopeless situation. All we need to do as people looking in this area is just listen to sort of podcasts like these or read material like this, and it'll keep eluding you and explaining to you why you need to make fundamental changes in your life, and that the only way you can do it is to access new knowledge that you've never sort of come across before. Now, I know a lot of our readers listeners.
Listeners.
Listeners, thank you. I know a lot of our listeners aren't totally new to all this. So they've read some books, they've watched some podcasts. So you're starting to get familiar, all you people out there. This is just going to keep projecting you on that path. And it's really the spiritual journey, and it's called the path to truth. Okay? What were you going to say there, Jacqui?
Well, I was just going to say it's an absolutely beautiful summary, and I think really useful given that we've had a few sessions already. And I was so conscious coming in today that we've really been throwing around some really big terms, God and consciousness, and I think we've even mentioned reincarnation and karma and things which we perhaps, it might have been nice if we had more time to explain, but I know that we'll get to those as the chapters move on. But I just think that summary is so beautiful because the reason I think for most of us we don't do any better is because we don't know any better. So you're right, to access
Jacqui.
the wisdom teachings, to start to just continually will become accustomed to new terminology and its meaning, but keep refining that understanding. And also, we're forgetful as human beings. We learn something, we have a moment of realization, and then life gets busy with our work, our family, our health, whatever it might be, and we kind of forget. And so even if we know it or have learned it, one thing I've realized in my life and in learning and studying this region is that you need the constant revisiting to that if you're really wanting to apply this in everyday life. So yeah, just really enjoy the way you summarized that for everybody and looking forward to what we're going to jump into.
Thank you very much, Jacqui. That's very kind of you. But see, you've just even in that little passage, you've opened up another whole sort of area, and that's that reference to we can't. It's impossible to learn anything instantly, or very seldom. Most times we need to relearn and repeat and have refreshers every now and again and so on. And that's a very important part of this teachings. All through the chapters, Krishna understands that Arjuna, which is us, the students, can't absorb it all in one go. And so people might pick up even now as I'm linking chapter 1 into chapter 2 and rehashing, if you like, or referring to some of chapter 1 again, to keep sort of saying it slightly differently, but using it to lead into chapter 2. And so this is the technique actually in the Gita, now that you've mentioned it, that as we get to the end of chapter 3, he'll already starting to do some teaching that are leading into the next chapter. And then when we start chapter 4, there'll be an early part of it will cover some of chapter 3. And then it'll do the teaching in chapter 4. And then at the end of chapter 4, it'll start leading into chapter 5. You understand what I'm saying? So there's constant revision through the teachings, and there'll be constant revision as I'm saying, because every chance I get, I'll be repeating words like our buddhi and the ego, and the two forces in there, because even when people hear it for the first time or the second or third time, and it starts making sense and whatever, but people still don't grasp the enormity of it and how fundamental it is to us, for example. And so by constant references, a bit here and a bit there and a bit later on, it'll get more ingrained in the being. Okay.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah. So now that I think I've sort of cleared up that aspect of the killing side of things that are in the early stages, and just let me reassure you again that we're pretty much done with that now. Where the focus now will be on the battle that's taking place within us. So I'm just trying to, with all of these little side discussions we're having, Jacqui, I'm just struggling for a second here to find my spot. Yeah,
that's all right. Take your time.
Yeah, that's good. So I was saying, firstly, wanted to focus on the battle side of things. And secondly, now I want to refer to the remaining 16 chapters, which now focus on Krishna's teachings, which can be interpreted or understood in two ways. And this is you referred to this again, Jacqui. I'm giving you a bit of a hammering at the moment. You referred to this, if you recall, at the end of last session, but it was such an important point you made. I'd just like to reiterate that, and because that's an important part of what I want to say about the whole teachings of the Gita. So. The point you're probably wondering what I'm referring to there, Jacqui, but the point you made towards the end last week was that the Gita can be interpreted in different ways, and there's really two ways it can be interpreted in. When I say interpreted, not meaning understood, but how it can be applied in our lives. Yeah, application, I suppose. So there's what I describe as the here and now immediate teachings of the Gita. So anyone listening now, just as you're listening over the coming podcasts, try and put the teachings into practice and see how it's making changes in your lives. So that's where most people that I've come in contact with, how they see the Gita and benefit from it. But for some of the more advanced students, and even the ones who aren't at the moment, but it might grow on them as the podcasts go, the end goal of the teachings is self-realization. So for a longer term, the teaching will take the being to the ultimate goal of human existence, which is self-realization. Are you understanding, Jacqui? So we as listeners at the moment, wherever you are on the stage of your spiritual journey, your spiritual growth, every new knowledge you gain is a benefit to you. Part of it instantly, and part of it long term. That these instant ones that help you will eventually accumulate and finish with self-realization. Right, Jacqui? So it is a terrific point you made last week, and it was one that I wanted to stress. So, because if I mention self-realization, some people shrug their shoulders. It sort of means not much to them, if anything, and they think, well, these podcasts aren't going to be of much use. And I'm just trying to make it very clear to anyone that's listening, they'll be of tremendous use to me. Trust me. Yeah, you mightn't want to trust me, but trust me, they will be of use to you. And if at the end it comes to achieve self-realization, well, that's the ultimate cherry on the cake. But all the way along, you can have a slice of the cake. That's a nice way to put it, is it, Jacqui?
Yes. And I'm just thinking, because I'm so aware that we're blending our audiences here, Michael, in doing these podcasts. You know, I mentioned earlier that I've been a yoga teacher for about 25 years. You've been teaching philosophy for close to 30 years. I imagine that the people tuning into these podcasts will predominantly be people that we've both been exposed to and or their friends, family, and networks. So even as you're speaking then, it occurs to me that actually a lot of people may not even be exposed or have been exposed to terminology like self-realization, hence why there's a little bit of a confusion or a not so great concern with what that is, because actually there's not an understanding. And I'm sure there's far more formal explanations, and I'm sure you can probably explain this far better. But one way I've often tried to give this a little bit of context for yoga students over the years that are, you know, very much at the early beginning stages, it is just to remind ourselves of all of the capacities of our being. And you certainly mentioned this early on. You know, we've got our physical form, we've got the mind which does the thinking, we've got the feeling tone within the body that has all the felt responses, and somewhere deep within, and we often sort of put our hand to our heart and think that that place of truth, that place where our deep self with our deepest aspirations for this life resides, you know, in the heart. So this soul, or, you know, truth of self that we're looking to explore. And I often think it's useful if we consider that moving through life, you know, we know those moments sometimes where everything just goes beautifully and we feel so attuned, so connected, everything seems to be going beautifully, and we're so settled that no external event can kind of ruffle our feathers or cause us distress, because everything just feels so unified and strong and connected. And so in a way, I often like to think that that gives us a little taster as to this sort of end state of self-realization, that the idea is that we can know ourselves so deeply, we can have such mastery over ourselves that external circumstances aren't rattling us or frightening us or worrying us or causing anxiety or distress, that we can be in that beautiful sort of state of internal alignment, unperturbed by anything else. That's probably a far too simplistic explanation, but I think it's useful perhaps for beginners to give it some tangible sort of context. Would you add anything else to that, Michael? I mean, I'm sure we could actually spend hours adding a lot to this, but in summary,
Well, we
would you
could.
add something?
No, I couldn't add anything to that, Jacqui. You expressed it beautifully. And it's just another way of saying really what I was saying, but more maybe user-friendly type of thing. But we'll have a more serious sort of discussion on this when we get to, say, chapter 18.
Yes. All right, over to you. Let's continue on with chapter 2.
Okay. So I've alluded to sort of chapter 2 and the link between 1 and 2 and so on. So now we're actually starting chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, and it's titled The Yoga. Remember, yoga means path, the path of knowledge, the yoga of knowledge. And some of the other commentators, just to give you an idea how they refer to their chapters. Some call it the philosophy of discrimination, which is a word I've already used, and that's what I refer to as the buddhi. It's the part of us, the highest part of us, higher than the mind, the thinking mind. The buddhi mind, it's all-knowing. The thinking mind is limited to whatever it's thought of or was capable of thinking of. So there's a huge difference, but I'll keep explaining that and detailing it more as we go. Another one calls it the way of discrimination. Another commentator calls it the yoga of wisdom, the yoga of analysis, the illumined man. So the path to knowledge. So there's just to give you the listeners a taste of different ways the different commentators do a heading. But in essence, it's the path of knowledge. And I've already been stressing knowledge a lot in the 3 podcasts we've already done, how important and valuable, and particularly new knowledge, and this spiritual knowledge. So we're not talking physics or medical or this sort of stuff. We're talking spiritual knowledge, which we can easily relate to. When I say spiritual knowledge which will help us develop our spiritual understanding and our spiritual growth. That's probably a better way of putting it. So just like, I'll refer quickly to some notes I've jotted down to keep it all rolling. So it's a fascinating chapter in that it's an exhaustive summary of the whole philosophical teachings of the Gita. It contains 72 verses, and making it the second longest chapter in the book. The only one longer is the final chapter at 78 slokas or verses. The early shlokas continue in chapter 2. The first 10 verses still continue, like I was saying before, about continuation from chapter 1 and making references to the battle, but in a totally different sense now, which I'll outline in the coming sort of sentences. And then comes a critical turning point in Arjuna's life, which could be all of our lives, because we're Arjuna, in shloka 11. And again, I won't go into it now. I'll elaborate, but just giving an idea that that's what's coming ahead in the next few minutes. So then comes the critical turning point in Arjuna's life when he decides he will fight the greatest battle of his life, and he begs his friend and now guru, Krishna, to impart his knowledge so that he may be guided and inspired to his ultimate victory. So he's coming to his senses, and he realizes he needs some outside help, some new knowledge, and he knows that Krishna, his friend, has got that, and he's begging him to pass it on to him. The great Indian sage Shankara, who's one of my great favourites, emphasises the importance of this knowledge on our spiritual journey. So we pick up the story from chapter 1, where we left Arjuna in a terrible state of distress. His emotions had suddenly overwhelmed him. And this is what happens to many people, Jacqui, in their lives. They get too emotionally involved, and it's a natural human trait. I'm not you know, putting anyone down or anything. We've all experienced it. And with it then goes, in that confused emotional state, the intellectual mind thinking gets equally confused. And so the being becomes a bit of a mess. The anger or the stress or the tension or the hurt or whatever it is that's causing all that mucks up, interferes with our normal way of handling things. And I think everyone realises that. And so an hour later, or sleep on it, or a couple of days later, you know, some time later, you cool yourself down, calm yourself down, and you start thinking, say, oh, I wish I hadn't have said that. I wish I hadn't have done it. I wish I had have said this. But that's all because of that instant turmoil that we get caught up in. Well, the teaching, that's where he is at the moment, right, in his life. And I'm assuming that all our listeners, if they're not in it now, they have experienced this, that it's nothing new to them. That's all I'm trying to say, that don't be thinking it's a story about Arjuna and Krishna. I keep saying it's a story about us, our lives. And these things happen. And if you're traveling nicely, well, good luck to you, and I'm very glad. But next year or 2 years' time, you don't know what's around the corner. So this would help you be prepared for having this sort of knowledge. It's a win-win situation. If you got the knowledge, you're better equipped to handle it. You mightn't in the early stages handle it as well as you like, but as you practice and understand it more, you'll get more confident, more sure, and it'll kick in quicker and more and very firmly and with authority and strength. So he said. So we're saying he's mentally shattered, intellectually paralysed. Grief is overtaking him, and that's what I've just described. So he falls to the floor of his chariot. He drops his bow and arrow. This is this mighty warrior that's, you know, like any of us in our lives. Everything's going good. We feel we're on top of the world, everything. And then suddenly some big sort of aspect in our lives turns that all about, and we become a bit of a mess, or a real mess. And it's because his ego has totally overpowered him. So they're the two components, the higher self, buddhi, and the lower self, ego. And that's the constant battle that I'll be referring to and using those words in the remaining podcasts that we're doing, Jacqui. So now here for the first time, Arjuna turns his attention onto himself. He observes, this is an important part, observes. He observes how he's thinking, speaking, and acting. So he's starting to calm down and saying, why am I saying this? Why am I doing this? Why am I acting like this? Those sorts of things. He realizes that something's gone terribly wrong within, and he begins to see that his own nature has been soiled by weak self-pity. And so a lot of tears that people shed, Jacqui, in their lives are what I call, and what's called really, the tears of self-pity. Yeah, woe is me, my marriage is broken up, I've lost my business, whatever it might be. And we cry and we get upset. Well, you can't avoid what's going to happen or is happening in your lives, but what so you can't do anything about that. That's sort of set in concrete in a sense. But what you can do is react differently with this new knowledge than what you used to in the past. And what you'll find is that by having the new knowledge, even though the situation's the same for everyone, but your reaction to it makes it less stressful and less hurtful and so on. One of the great masters, I think it was Marsilio Ficino from the time of the Renaissance 500 odd years ago, he puts it beautifully. He says, suffer gladly, but suffer ungladly. Suffer gladly or suffer ungladly, but suffer you will. Yeah, that's a profound statement. So he's saying something's going to happen in your life. And when he says suffer gladly, he means you've got some knowledge and you accept that it's happened and you deal with it as calmly as you can. Or suffer ungladly, you kick and scream and say no, and how could this happen to me, and all the rest of it, which means you're going to suffer badly. So it's a very deep thing, but you know, people might like to, if they remember, contemplate on it. I'll repeat it again. He says suffer gladly or suffer ungladly, but suffer you will. Okay. Jack, I'm going to ask you to read a couple of shlokas in one minute, Jackie. But just to lead into that is the last few lines of what I was saying about the state of Arjuna. So through his own self-inflicted crisis, notice the words through his own. Yeah, lack of knowledge. It's making him. The crisis is there, the fight for his kingdom, but how he's handling it is making him become a total mess. He's not handling it the way he's capable of as a brave warrior that he is. So, and because of the lack of knowledge, true knowledge, he now finds himself in a critical turning point in his life, best described here in the following verses from Jack Hawley's Gita. So, Jackie, you've got Jack Hawley's Gita there, haven't you?
I do have it here, and I'll
Would
read
you? Yeah, on page 12 at the bottom, there's the verses 7 and 8. And that simply is using some of the words of the commentators in the Gita will then encapsulate what I'm talking about at this stage.
Yes. So he says, I am utterly confused, Arjuna continues, as to what is my duty. I can't think of any remedy for this awful grief that has dried up my energy. Krishna. If I were to gain great wealth and power, what would that prove? I am asking you to help me, not just to tell me to go out and fight. I beg you to tell me, what should I do? I am your pupil. Be my teacher, my guru. I take refuge in you and surrender to you. Please instruct me, beloved Krishna. Show me the way.
They're beautiful words, aren't they, Jackie?
Yeah. They are beautiful. And I'm thinking, surely I'm not the only human being in the world that at times has really wished for some divine insight. Those times in life where you just feel utterly uncertain, utterly lost, unsure of how to proceed, and you just wish there was a guiding light before you that could help you make the best decision. I feel confident that many of the people listening will also know that feeling from different points in life.
Well, I'm hoping you could have added there that now that I've found the right person and passing over some of this beautiful knowledge, wish I had have had this 10, 20 years ago. But what you've expressed on a serious note is very common to everyone that's now listening. That all relate to what you've said, what I'm saying, and what Krishna's saying to Arjuna. When I had my moment of awakening, my first reaction, Jackie, was I was very angry with myself, really, in a sense, as to how could I have been so stupid that I'd gone through nearly 50 years of my life and hadn't accessed any of this knowledge. And if I had of what I already knew at that stage, how much different change it could have made in my life. But we all realise, and I did very quickly, that only lasted a week or so. But it's that notion of no use crying over spilt milk. You can't undo anything you've ever said, thought, or done in the past. You take solace from the fact that whatever you've thought, said, and done in your life to date, has come that you're not happy with, has come about through a state of ignorance, meaning you didn't have this knowledge. But you won't have that excuse if you keep listening to these podcasts, because you'll be gaining some new knowledge, and so that'll make it that you won't revisit the past like you was. So you understand the difference, that the past was when there was no knowledge or very limited, and now and in the future there's going to be more knowledge, truthful knowledge, that'll be extremely helpful. And that's where the difference is. Knowledge is the critical aspect, but it's only the start. Then you've got to put it into practice, let go and all that, but it's the starting point. If no one gets the new knowledge, they're doomed to just continue in the rest of their lives the way they're doing. And I referred to that before in an earlier podcast. If you keep doing what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. There's no way of stopping that. It's like a continuous merry-go-round. Only way you can stop it is introduce something new. So thanks for Jackie. That was beautifully read. So at this point, Arjuna realizes that he needs outside help. In his current state of confusion and despair, he becomes aware that he doesn't have the necessary knowledge to rise above the turmoil he is experiencing. So we're touching on this in and out, aren't we, in all of these discussions so far today. And this next little bit is particularly important because it ties in exactly, Jackie, with what you said. I wish I had had this knowledge before, okay? Well, the reason you didn't have it before was you weren't ready for it before. That's not just you, but that's everyone. Same for me, same for everyone listening now. But the opportunity now arises that where the person can get some new knowledge. So avail yourself of it and use it for your own benefit, obviously. So this is how some of the writers refer to this. So through humility and devotion. Now, see, these are words, Jacqui, that don't apply to many people's lives. Humility and devotion. And as you become devoted to the truth, Krishna's teachings, but could be Jesus' teachings or Buddha's teachings, all the great masters teach the truth. As you become devoted to that, which means the ultimate source that truth comes from, it brings about in you a humility. And you're prepared to then say to someone, and particularly a teacher in Arjuna's case here, I need help. Just like, we know people go to psychologists or something, or anger counsellors or marriage counsellors, and they say, I need help in this area of my life. Well, this help that Arjuna is asking for Krishna now is a universal help, a panacea, a cure-all for every human ailment that exists on the planet. Not saying it cures your cancer, but it cures all the things that go with it, your fear, and helps you with the pain, and all of those sorts of situations. So it says I've written here, through humility and devotion, Arjuna has now totally opened up to his friend and now guru and begged him to be his divine teacher. You read it out, Jacqui. Please, can you be my teacher? The being's got to get to a stage where they're so desperate for new knowledge that that's what they're really saying inside. You don't have to say it to your teacher, oh, here I am, please beg me, I'm begging you. Yeah, Michael, I'm begging you. No, you're just tuning in. That means you're saying that's what you're meaning. I need some help, and I need some honest, truthful help. And I know I can get it from this book or this teacher or this guru or so on. And he's realizing that he needs this new knowledge to rise above the turmoil he's experiencing. Sorry, I've already read that. So when he says to him, begs him in that, it's like Arjuna's surrender is now total. He's on his knees, basically. He's a whimpering mess. He's sweating. He's crying. He's pleading. So he's in a really bad state in his life. And Krishna has waited patiently for this moment. If the listeners are aware or anything, but it's a bit hard to know because nothing much really has been taught. But Krishna hasn't said anything up to now. He hasn't taught him or anything like that. He's just like a good friend or anyone, letting you blubber away and cry on your shoulder, so to speak, and you try and comfort them and so on. So he doesn't do anything because he knows that when the person's not ready, it's no use talking. Yeah, the person's incapable of, in the condition Arjuna's in, he's incapable of hearing anything of substance. So now Arjuna's settling himself down, and so Krishna says he's been patiently waiting for this moment, and he knows that knowledge is taken, not given. He can't just give it to people. They've got to ask for it, and then you give it to them. But if they don't ask for it, you're just sort of, in a sense, forcing it on them, which is really the same as talking to a brick wall. It has no impact. So
I'm just having a giggle there, thinking anyone who's a parent will be probably having a smile to themselves. How many times we try and counsel our children, particularly teenage children, as they emerge out into the world, and we want to impart some wisdom and learning, and we're met with rolling eyes or deaf ears or, a back turned to us as they walk out and, shut the door. So it's a good example. If they're not willing recipients and they're not interested in listening, no matter how much heartfelt teaching you want to give or provide, it falls on deaf ears.
Yeah, a lovely example, and that's one I'm sure nearly everyone that's listening would be able to relate to. So time's marching on, Jacqui, and I'd just like to read or make another 2 or 3 minutes, and that'll sort of be a nice spot to finish off in, where we can then continue on in the next podcast. So I was just making the comment that Krishna's been waiting until a person asks for help, and then I've switched it to asking the listeners. Well, this is true, isn't it? Think about it. People tell us things all the time, don't they? At work, at family, friends, they give us advice, they make suggestions, they give us the answers. This is what you need to fix your marriage problems. This is how you go about restructuring your business and that. Often the people who are giving us advice mean well, but they often don't know any more than you do, because they haven't got any higher knowledge either. So they're just swapping one opinion for your opinion and so on. And so, but the point I'm making here is that even though people are bombarding us, and sometimes we trust someone strong enough to follow their advice, and eventually it might work out, but more often it doesn't. But in the end, we make the choice. We decide whether we're going to listen to what mum and dad's telling us, or what our friends are suggesting, or what our husbands and wives think. Oh, this is what I think's best for you. Try that, husbands, on your wives, and see how far you go. Anyway, all jokes aside, and I've just mentioned here, Jacqui, that I mentioned about my own waking up experience. So I was at that same stage in life that we're talking about now, and I knew I needed to. There was something in me I didn't know, but like I'm describing now, and I know, but just something inside, and that's your higher self telling me, and it was telling me I've got to do something different. And immediately, within a day or two of making that decision, I saw an ad in the paper and went to my first meeting. And then met a person there over coffee, and they told me that this person's running a group. So within another few days, I was at a group. So over the next sort of 5-10 years of my life, I was hardly ever at home. People used to say, aren't you worried about your wife leaving you? And I said, oh, no, she might actually be happy that I'm not at home so much. I don't know. But I was on a mission. Yeah, nothing was going to stop me. So retreats and going to classes and going to lectures and going anywhere and reading books, meditating, all sorts of things. My hunger was so enormous for the truth. And I'm just going to leave it here, Jacqui, with putting that to our listeners, that if you can relate in any shape, way or form to what this discussion has been today, well, you're in exactly the same situation that Arjuna finds himself, that I found myself in, and you're saying, oh yeah, I think this, to some extent or other. It won't be exact, but I'm sure you can understand what I'm saying in a brushstroke sort of way. So, and the exercise that I suggested last week that you have a look at was to look closely as to see if you are at some sort of crossroads in your life, a sort of a midlife crisis, or you're starting to feel overwhelmed by life and not knowing, you're 40 or you're 50, and if I keep doing what I've been doing, it's not going to be all that crash hot. I wonder what I could do that would be different or new. All right, Jacqui. So, I'm just trying to include the listeners and have them sort of thinking in their own mind, or being able to relate in their own minds that yes, some of this, or if not all of it, is applicable to me now, and I'm. Your homework is going to be, if I can maybe add that in, and then you can have the finishing comments, Jacqui. But your exercise for this week I'd give you, it's a very gentle one. But I'd like you to self-reflect, and most of the exercises will be self-reflecting, because you want you to observe as to what sort of impact the teaching is having on any of you. So I want you to look within, and I want you to ask yourself truthfully and deeply, what am I feeling? Do I want to make change in light of what we've discussed today, but also in the previous podcasts? You need to be prepared to make the hard call on it, and in your own minds. So you've got certainty, because otherwise, if there's wavering there, ego will get in and try and undermine you and sabotage you and get you off the track, and you'll stop listening to these podcasts. So do you want to make changes in your life? Have you got the courage and the strength to follow this through? Because it won't be easy. It won't be impossible, yeah, but there's going to be, it's not a cushy ride. Jesus, Krishna or Jesus, none of them, they don't believe in a free lunch. Yeah. Oh, here, dear, I'll just give you a hug and a pat and kiss you, and everything will be all right. That life doesn't work like that. If you think it does, well, you're just kidding yourself and you're in for a rude shock. But most of you have already realized that life doesn't work like that. And so the questions I'm putting to you is, how are you feeling? How determined are you, or how certain are you, or are you really starting to get convinced? And so are these early podcasts starting to stir something inside you? And this is that resonance that I referred to earlier on, Jacqui. So if you're feeling strongly that, hey, what I'm hearing so far is resonating with me, I'm liking it, I've got a certain trust in it that it's going to keep going, as Michael's explaining to us, well, then you're in for what I'd call a long haul. Yeah. But you need to do this little bit of serious introspection, because if you make it really certain and watertight for yourself, well, then you're likely to last a distance of 40 podcasts. So, Jacqui, that's all I've got to say today. If you'd like to make any comment that you want to sort of wind it up.
Yeah, perfect. Look, I think that's a lovely conclusion, but I suspect, knowing what I know of our joined audiences at this point and considering who they might share it with, I suspect the fact that people are tuned in and listening already indicates that they're interested in self-development and self-transformation, even if it's only at the very beginning stages. But I just think wherever you're at on your journey, hopefully there's some gems of wisdom. I feel quite confident that there will be, and there has been some shared already. And we look forward to sharing with you over the coming weeks and months. So thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in, and we will see you next week. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Jacqui, and thank you, listeners.